Good evening to all of you who have joined us for our latest webinar in the Atlas Society's Monday Night Philosophy Series. I'm William R. Thomas, your MC for tonight's webinar. Tonight's webinar is the last. It's the last in our new 5-part webinar series by Alexander R. Cohen. The series is called Objectivism, a rational philosophy for the hero in your soul. It's a new survey of the philosophy founded by Ayn Rand. The course began on April 22nd with Session 1, Living for Yourself. It continued April 29th with Session 2, Focusing on Reality. On May 6th, we enjoyed Session 3, Values and Virtues. And last week, in Session 4, Alexander R. Cohen discussed individual rights and the objectivist conception of government. All 4 of these webinars were recorded, and they're available on our website in the Objectivism Webinars section. In tonight's webinar, titled Spiritual Fuel, Alexander R. Cohen will argue that some of the most important values are spiritual. They relate primarily to the needs of a person's mind and emotions, and among these are art and friendship. In this webinar, he'll invite us to consider why a person focused on achieving his values in reality needs art, and why a person committed to self-interest has an interest in having friends. Alexander R. Cohen, the instructor for the course, is the managing editor of the Atlas Society's Business Rights Center and an associate scholar at the Atlas Society. You can read his blog and other articles on business rights on our website. He studied at American University and went on to earn a law degree at the University of Pennsylvania, and he's done extensive graduate work in philosophy, including at the City University of New York, at the University of Virginia, and at the Atlas Society, where he's been an instructor at our graduate seminar. Now, the webinar will begin with a slideshow and live video presentation, which will run on the order of 40 or 50 minutes. And after that, there'll be an open question and answer session, which will run as long as everyone stays connected or enough people seem interested in staying with the discussion. And so, I think we're all quite ready for the presentation of Alexander R. Cohen on spiritual fuel. Take it away, Alexander.
This whole webinar may sound out of place. I'm talking about the spirit, but objectivism is a philosophy for living on Earth, this material, profit-chasing Earth, as John Galt says. What's this about spirit? Isn't that mysticism? I'm going to talk about feelings and emotions. But objectivism is a philosophy for living by reason and art. The second webinar in this series was called Focusing on Reality. And I want to talk about getting swept away by stuff that's entirely made up, about entertainment, which distracts us from our real concerns, and friendship, for crying out loud. Friendship. All this time I've been banging on about living for yourself, and now I'm going to talk about other people being important. Well, yes, objectivism is a philosophy for living for yourself, in reality, by reason, on this material, profit-chasing Earth. But it is also a philosophy for living passionately, for finding joy, for finding and empowering the hero in your soul. And that takes more than argument. After all, as I said back in the first webinar, argument can't even tell us to live. I want to start by breaking down this phrase, spiritual fuel. This is something I haven't done or read, and I'm going to be going on a bit of a limb with some of this, especially on the fuel side, but it's my best interpretation of the idea. There are 2 concepts here, at least one of them plainly metaphorical. Let's start with spirit. What does this mean? First of all, spirit means consciousness. I spent a lot of time talking about consciousness in webinar 2, so let me highlight just a couple of points. If you want more, go review webinar 2 later, after this one. First, its function. Consciousness is identification. It's being aware of something and of what that something is. Consciousness is the recognition of reality, not the creation of it. In order to think, you have to choose to think. It doesn't happen automatically. And to choose to think, and indeed to think, takes effort. And you don't just have to choose to think, you have to decide what to think about. And that too takes effort, especially when you need to think about something that is in some way difficult. Rand at one point defines the word spiritual as pertaining to consciousness. But we cannot consider the issue of spiritual fuel without considering the subconscious as well. The subconscious, remember, is all of a person's mental contents and activities of which he is not consciously aware at a given time. You can't make choices about your subconscious, at least not directly, although you can choose to do a wide variety of things to shape or influence it. For example, you decide what subjects to study, and you can deliberately do things you'd like to get in the habit of doing. Precisely because it's not conscious, you can't monitor the performance of your subconscious the way you can your conscious mind. You can't directly tell when it's acting on false premises or when it hasn't thought something through, for example. It's your subconscious that directs your conscious awareness to certain facts, such as when your name comes up in conversation at the next table. And it's your subconscious that gives you your emotions. Your emotions are subconscious evaluations of facts guided by your sense of life. Your sense of life is a feature of your subconscious, but I'm highlighting it here because of the central role it plays in your experience of life, and in particular, in your response to art and to other people. A sense of life is at least a gut-level sense of how the world works. I think of it as including a gut-level sense of how the world should work, not your philosophical ethics and politics, but what makes you feel good or bad about certain things in the world. Because your sense of life is automatic and relevant to everything, it supplies a sort of emotional theme to your life, or a distinct palette of emotional responses that colors your life. But while it is in part about you, a sense of what it is to be a person and what sort of person you are, it is primarily your sense of the world in which you live. So let's consider a few worlds you might live in. What if this is what the world seems like to you? A path going nowhere, birds flying about in no particular direction, nowhere to go, nowhere worth going. What if you see no sign of a caring consciousness of another person, or only a green face that does not see you? This may or may not be Van Gogh's last painting. Probably it isn't. But I'm not the only one to have looked at it and thought it had to be, and it is close. It's called Wheat Field with Crows. It's hard to see how you go anywhere from here. More to the point, it's hard to see why you go anywhere from here. But what if this is your world? A place where if you don't approve of the way things are, you try a revolution. A place where exhilarating actions are open to you. Where even if you can't achieve what you're fighting for, you can fight for it, and that itself is relevant. In such a world, no matter how much evil there is, you might be willing to face it. You might decide it's worth fighting in order to live a good life, even if the best life available to you is the fight itself. This, if you don't recognize it, is a moment from the movie musical that Les Mis. Do you hear the people sing? Or finally, what if this is your world? A place where you can not only fight for values, but actually achieve them. Where you can think long and hard about a problem, such as creating a metal cheaper, lighter, and stronger than steel, and solve that problem, and bring something new into reality. What if it's a world where after you do that work, the work is done, and the new thing you have created is real and yours, and you can look at it with the pride and satisfaction of earned ownership of something marvelous. This is First Heat, the objectivist painter Brian Larson's take on Hank Rearden and his metal. In a world like this, you might set out to create great new values, and you might set out with the expectation of actually doing so. In whatever sort of world you live in, if you're going to live, you need to choose to live. As I said back in Lecture 1, that's not automatic. In order to choose to live, you have to have some motivation to do so. That means something you actually value, something you want to gain and keep. It at least helps to believe that that value is attainable, that you live in a world where it's possible to achieve values, that you are the sort of person who can achieve them. And that's something you don't just need to think consciously when you think about it. You need to feel it. At least that helps. You need that as part of your general view of yourself and your general view of the world, something that's there even when you are not focused on it. You need a sense of life that says you have something worth doing in your life. In terms of emotions, you need joy, the experience of attained value. You need desire, which reflects the conviction that value is possible and motivates you to pursue it. But your own life probably doesn't supply enough of these psychological needs, at least not all of the time. Whatever projects you're working on, whatever goals you're pursuing, they take time. Sometimes your projects are frustrated by factors beyond your control. Indeed, if there's anything you want to gain, you don't have it yet. And that means, unless it's something you had and lost, you don't have the real life experience of having it. Most of us probably have some vices. Moral perfection is attainable, but it's hard. And all of us probably have errors. And if we're morally ambitious, we see our vices and our errors, and they bother us. They weigh against our self-esteem, our conviction of our own value, and our potential to achieve. It can be particularly bad when we compare ourselves against others. Because as someone once said, we compare our own outtakes to everyone else's highlight reel. So we need external sources to back up our conviction that there's value to be achieved and that we can achieve it. We need ways of experiencing value beyond the context of our own lives, for when there isn't enough there, or when our awareness of it isn't strong enough to keep us going. And that's not just a matter of desperate times. We can almost always use additional motivation, additional encouragement. So this is what I'll offer as my definition of spiritual fuel. Any outside reinforcement of your commitment to the pursuit of values. That is, anything coming from someone else's consciousness instead of yours that helps motivate you to desire values and to act on the desire for values. I believe Rand's first use of the idea of spiritual fuel comes in her play Ideal, which was published in the early Ayn Rand. The heroine says, a spirit, too, needs fuel. It can run dry. And the whole story of the play is her quest for that fuel. But that play also includes a cautionary note. What do you dream of? Nothing. Of what account are dreams? Of what account is life? None but who made it so. Those who cannot dream. No, those who can only dream. Those who cannot dream, those who value nothing beyond what is close at hand, have nowhere to go. But those who can only dream don't go anywhere. They make their own lives of no account. The point of spiritual fuel is to keep you going in your own real life, toward your own real values. Neither art, nor friendship, nor anything else can be a substitute for living your own life in reality, for creating the values that it is your purpose to create. If you put gasoline in an engine and drive, you can go where you want to go. If you have gasoline, but no engine, and no car, and no nav, and you don't try to go anywhere, what you have is a puddle on the floor, and a dangerous puddle at that. So what is art? Let's start with Rand's definition. Art is a selective recreation of reality according to an artist's metaphysical value judgments. Metaphysical value judgments are evaluations of the basic nature of man and of reality, whether explicit and conceptual at the conscious level, or in emotional terms at the subconscious level, in your sense of life. But art isn't just concerned with the world as it is. Art is also concerned with human potential. In a phrase Rand borrows from Aristotle, with man as he might be and ought to be. So, in creating art, an artist rebuilds concretes from abstractions. In epistemology, remember, we create abstractions, concepts, from concrete realities. Art turns that around. Thus, for example, the objectivist painter Damon A.H. Denise wanted to show the power of the human mind, that there is no limit to what a person can see, understand, envision, create. And he wanted to show the power of philosophy to empower the mind. So he created this painting of a woman looking into the distance with an expression of purpose and intellect, and the volume of Aristotle in her hand. It's called An Awakened Mind. Ayn Rand wanted to show the power of the mind to know reality, to create values in it, and to know the nature of those values. And she created many, many things to that end. But one of the most dramatic of these is the Reardon Metal Bridge, and the scene in which Hank and Dagny ride over it. Recall the way I used this back in Webinar 2 to signify a world in which knowledge and action are possible. I was able to do that because Rand had concretized those abstractions, knowledge, action, and the connection between the two, in the Reardon Metal Bridge, one specific, albeit imaginary, concrete. You can't visualize knowledge and action directly, but you can visualize the Reardon Metal Bridge. And of course, you can do it, especially if you have the assistance of the movie makers. Joss Whedon wanted to show that a young woman doesn't have to be a damsel in distress, waiting for men to rescue her. She can be the heroine of her own story. And he wanted to show that this didn't mean giving up on being beautiful, or on having loving relationships with men. He created Buffy. Victor Hugo wanted to show that a child can find joy in life under any circumstances. That no matter how miserable his circumstances get, his heart doesn't have to be miserable. And in Les Mis, he created Gavroche, who in the novel sings, "Joy is my character, misery is what I have." Because art takes abstractions and makes them concrete, it makes them easier to grasp. You can't think all at once about all the evidence you have that the world is knowable and that you can act in it. But you can think of the Reardon Metal Bridge. You can visualize it. It's one thing. You can grasp it with your mind. Of course, philosophy is easier to deal with than everything all at once. Philosophy organizes the world conceptually. But even a philosophical system is complex and hard to deal with. It's easier, though less precise, to ask, what would Dagny Taggart do? And art is even more accessible than a single, real individual. For example, even though I work with David Kelly and Lauren Rice, there's a lot I don't know about both of them. But the character of Francisco d'Anconia is spelled out on the pages of Atlas Shrugged. I can see all the data there is about Francisco d'Anconia, and I can reread it as many times as I want. So even though he doesn't exist, indeed, because he doesn't exist, I can know Francisco better than I can know David and Laurie or anyone else who actually exists. Music is different from most other arts in that music attempts to recreate states of consciousness directly. It thus recreates not external reality, but a way of thinking or feeling. Compare, for example, the Imperial March from Return of the Jedi with the Stars and Stripes Forever. At least, as I hear them, both convey an impressive sense of power and organization, but the organization is untempered in the Imperial March and has an overtone of fear. This is the march of the dictator who demands obedience. It's how you might feel if you were a willing part of an impersonal imperial machine. Sousa's masterpiece is celebratory and democratic. You want to sing along, and in fact he did write lyrics. And there's a sense that even amidst all this power, there's no need for fear, which is conveyed by the almost carefree counterpoint. Art gives you the opportunity to experience values and valuing beyond the context of your own mind. For example, when I'm frustrated dealing with things or people, I often find it very satisfying to watch Buffy kill something. At a broader level, the heroes of Les Mis offer an experience of being dedicated to values. That, to my mind, is the most powerful theme of Les Mis, because it's what nearly all the characters have in common. The bishop is dedicated to charitable love, Enjolras to revolution, Javert to law and order. These may not all be genuine values, and the characters, as well as their author, are guilty of serious philosophical mistakes. But each one does face difficult choices and make them in keeping with his highest values. Each tries to shape his world according to his vision. And what they do and what they fight for matters so much to them that when you get in the story, you find, or at least I find, that what they value matters to me too within the story, and that what I value matters more to me because I've had that experience with them. Most of the art that I've mentioned in this webinar is art I particularly like. You may respond differently. You may respond differently because your sense of life is different from mine. By the nature of a sense of life, it's hard to describe one with any great precision. Yet it is clear that people's senses of life are very different from one another. The experiences you've had, the premises you've adopted, and all the other things that go into shaping your sense of life differ from mine, at least to an extent, and so does the resulting sense of life. Art invites you into a fictional world. A fictional world may or may not resemble the world as you know it in any number of respects, and that may make it more or less comfortable for you. For example, in Rand's fiction, especially her later fiction, people are either good or bad, rational or irrational. And the things they create either work or don't work accordingly. The Reardon Metal Bridge works. The mixed economy doesn't. Many people say that's not how the world really is, and they reject Rand's fiction for that reason. You have memories of the world looking differently to you that I may not share, and vice versa. For example, maybe you felt vulnerable and trapped and isolated. Robert Tracy's Defiant Captive may evoke that for you, and therefore be powerful, even if you no longer feel that way. And even if we share a commitment to individual rights, what's most important about that to each of us at a gut level may differ. For example, I think if you're an objectivist, you want things like this to happen in the world. But for some, the creation of wealth has a gut level importance that it doesn't for others. And so a painting like First Heat will be more meaningful, more valuable to those people than to those who don't share that same sense of life response. And by the way, I think here would be a good time to note that these objectivist paintings that I've noted, actually, I think all the paintings I've noted except for the Van Gogh, are paintings from Clint Cordair Fine Art at cordair.com. Wonderful place to spend some time getting some great artistic, spiritual fuel in your life. Now, of course, one of the most important elements of a work of fiction is the characters. And getting to know them has a lot in common with getting to know real people, or with learning about and admiring real people, which we'll discuss shortly. But first, I've been talking about art in terms of the way it concretizes abstractions and thereby allows you to grasp the world, or a particular vision of the world, and your place and potential in it. This can act as a spiritual fuel simply by reaffirming the way you see the world. It can act as fuel by letting you experience the world you want to create before you have created it, and by letting you experience the kinds of actions you want to take before you take them. But these things are not the same as technical merit. Merely because an artwork resonates with your sense of life or meets your emotional needs at a particular time doesn't mean it's great art. It may just be crummy art that happens to reflect your premises or your desires. On the other hand, merely because an artist has done an excellent job conveying what he wants to convey doesn't mean that it's going to mean much to you. You may not like what he wants to convey. It may be a very alien world. It may be a world of people pursuing values that you don't share. So you probably read, I know, I'm pretty sure I read, some well-crafted books that you didn't like or that I didn't like in a high school literature class. And on the other hand, if you go and look for fan fiction about fictional characters that you really like, you may very well find some badly written stuff that speaks to you. From the perspective of spiritual fuel, it is that sense of life response that you're looking for much more than the technical merit. And that's the real value that you're looking for. Admiring a real person gives you the experience of seeing virtue in practice, seeing it in another person. That includes both virtues you've already developed and those that you're trying to cultivate. Seeing virtues practiced successfully is evidence not only that it's possible to practice them, but that practicing them actually works, that a person can live that way and survive and flourish in reality. In short, it's an opportunity to see what a human being really can be. And in this respect, it's a more powerful fuel than art, because a real person is, in fact, real. Dagny Taggart achieves the successes she does and faces the setbacks she does because that's what Ayn Rand decided to write. But if Richard Branson makes a pile of money in his transportation business, that's because his actions really worked. What's primary here is the value that admiration offers for you, the observer, the admirer. After all, it's your response that we're talking about. But there's also a value in being admired. It's an opportunity to see your own value, the achievement of your character and ability, as it looks from the outside. If you're being admired by someone who has good values, who is responding to something real about you, it can confirm your understanding of who and what you are. It can confirm the value you represent to yourself and to others whom you respect. It says, you're good. And this, too, is a form of spiritual fuel. It's an especially important kind of fuel when the person receiving it has been receiving unjust hostility and condemnation. That's one reason I thought it was important last fall to write a commentary in praise of Google, not just to show what was at stake in the antitrust case against Google, but to say to the people at Google that there were people who really appreciate what they do. Although it's best to rely on one's own judgment, most people do have some desire for approval. And as with any other fact, the more testimony there is against what you think is the case, and the better positioned the people who disagree with you are to judge the matter, the more you have to wonder whether you're getting it right. So it is valuable to have people say, yes, you're good. Another way of getting evidence of your own value, a much more first-handed way, is to take a look at the things that you've created, especially when you can look at them with some detachment, as if they were written by someone else. For example, when you're looking at something you wrote some time ago. Now, this doesn't quite fit my definition of spiritual fuel because it ultimately comes from yourself, but it does serve the same function. It reminds you of what you are able to achieve. So, how does friendship provide spiritual fuel? Well, for one thing, you can see yourself through your friend's eyes. Sometimes that's explicit, as in this scene from Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, where Hermione tells Harry why she thinks he's a great wizard. And if you remember the context, it's a pretty good time for someone to give him a dose of spiritual fuel. He's about to go into battle alone. But this kind of spiritual fuel also comes implicitly. For example, you may get to see your friend enjoying spending time with you. Here I am, singing with a guy I met at a seminar. You may get to see your own traits, including your virtues and your sense of life, in your friend. That means seeing how they work out in reality, and how they look from the outside. And these 2 points can work together when you see that your friend values you for the things you value in your friend. One of the most essential aspects of a friendship is that friends value each other. But what does that mean? Now, obviously, we're talking about friendship, not slave owning. You don't value your friend in the way that you value a possession as a thing you've gained and get to keep for whatever purposes you wish. That would make you a danger to your friend. It wouldn't be treating your friend as a person who needs to pursue his own interests. But at the same time, it can't be independent of self-interest. You need everything in your life to contribute to your life, and that includes your friends. And you value the friendship because you recognize that it contributes to your life. And the contribution that it makes because of who the other person is, because of the person's character and personality. And because you recognize the value that your friend contributes to your life, you recognize that the better off your friend is, the better off you are. So you value your friend's survival, flourishing, and happiness. And since joy is the response to values attained, when you see your friend living and living well, you enjoy that, especially when you've contributed to it or are contributing to it. Similarly, you suffer when your friend suffers, because pain is the response to loss of values. And the relationship with that person is itself part of the way you want to live. You don't just want to perceive certain qualities in someone or have your qualities recognized by someone. Once you're friends with someone, you want to share those experiences with that person. In short, you care about your friend. In a strong friendship, at least, one would even say you love your friend. And having this emotional experience is how, at the emotional level, you recognize the value that your friend represents to you and the value that you represent to your friend. Friends are also people with whom you can do the things you both like to do, including things that are best done or can only be done with others. For example, one of my longest friendships is with a guy I met in high school with whom I talk about politics once or twice a week. And you can do things for each other. Beyond the material advantages of favors, there are spiritual values there. When you help your friend, that's an opportunity to see your own actions as efficacious, especially when it's a sort of action you don't get to practice in other contexts. In fact, it's an opportunity to see yourself acting on certain premises or on certain values that don't apply in the ordinary course of your life. For example, if it's meaningful to you that you are against a certain form of prejudice that isn't a prejudice against something that you are, well, you can't see that in action unless you're in a situation with somebody that that form of prejudice is aimed at. And looking from the flip side, when you see your friend expend effort to help you, that's evidence of your value to your friend. And of course, as you do things together, you get to know each other better, and you see things other people may not see about each other. This adds to the elements of visibility that friendship provides. Objectivism holds that when we seek value from another person, we are best off doing so by means of trade. Friendship is a value-seeking relationship, and yes, it is a trading relationship. The most important kind of trade in a genuine friendship is spiritual trade. Notably, we give and receive the same sorts of values pertaining to consciousness. Each friend gets to see traits he benefits from seeing in the other person. Each gets to see himself through his friend's eyes. And each gets the experience of having someone care about it. And since both parties get these benefits, it works to mutual advantage, at least as long as each friend is and remains the sort of person who can provide these values to the other friend. As with all trades, though, it's important to make sure you are actually getting the values you're looking for. Not all friendships actually contribute to your life, and it's up to you to get out of the ones that don't, pursue new ones that do, and adjust the effort you put into a given friendship according to its potential to contribute to your life. And on the flip side of that, if you want to preserve a friendship, you need to act to keep it by making sure that your friendship is valuable to the other person. Remember, the other person needs to look out for himself, too. And friendship is a free exchange. It can be ended when the value in it is gone. Indeed, you don't have much of a friendship if it isn't voluntary. Friendship also often involves material trade, doing favors and such. In real friendship, that's motivated in part by the concern you have with each other's interests. But even there, there's also an element that it's a rough form of barter, especially when there's an expectation that the favors each does for the other will roughly balance. Sometimes, of course, there are friendships that mostly consist of this sort of thing, but that's a secondary kind of friendship at best. And of course, friends learn from each other. They exchange ideas. They test their ideas in discussions together. And there again, you can see that value is gained through a free exchange to mutual advantage. Being a member of a community that shares certain values also gives you the opportunity to see those values in action and to be seen as valuable by others who share your standards. It's sort of like friendship in a diffuse way. And when you spend most of your time among people who do not share certain values that are important to you, it can be intensely valuable to be reminded that there are people who share your values and who appreciate you for sharing them, for acting. That's part of what's exciting about the Atlas Summit. Not only do we have an exciting program, organized, I should note, by our MC tonight, Will Thomas, you get to enjoy that program in the company of other objectivists and other people who are interested in the ideas that you've heard about over the course of these 5 webinars. You get to see people who value reason, reality, liberty, achievement. You get to see how they live in practice. You get to work on building friendships with them. And if you're watching this webinar live, you have just an hour and a quarter to get the early bird rate. So get over to our website. I've got the URL there, atlassociety.org/AS, and register. While you do that, I'll take questions. By the way, for those who are watching this in recorded form, you don't have the opportunity to get the early bird rate anymore. If you're watching it before the deadline, you can still get the late bird rate, whatever that is.
It's about 15% more. But yes, I do hope that many people will come to this year's Atlas Summit. We've got a wonderful program. Please check it out, and I hope to see you there. Now we're here for questions, and so as we turn to our questions, I'd like to begin with a pair of questions from Justin Groover. It's nice to hear from you, Justin. Yeah, it's nice to hear from Justin. And Justin has a master's in psychology, so Justin has insightful questions about psychology. And he first asks, would you say a person's sense of life is an expression of their spiritual fuel?
A person's sense of life is an expression of their spiritual fuel. Well, I think primarily it's your spiritual fuel that expresses your sense of life rather than the other way around. That is to say, when you go and you create spiritual fuel, for example, if you create art, you are speaking and creating from your own sense of life. You are concretizing your sense of life. And on the other hand, when you consume spiritual fuel, the spiritual fuel that works for you will be that which also reflects your sense of life. So, for example, a lot of people place a much higher value on family life than I do. And they may see stories or paintings or photographs that reflect that, that give them spiritual fuel. Those sorts of images do very little for me. Some people place a lot less value on political life than I do. They may see a lot less value than I do in art that has to do with politics. So I think it's the spiritual fuel that expresses the sense of life more than the other way around. But that said, I think one of the factors that can influence your sense of life is spiritual fuel that you consume. For example, your sense of life can be influenced by art, by novels that you've read, particularly by way of reinforcement. You have some germ of a sense of adventure, and you read more adventurous stories, and it gets stronger. Also by way of direction or clarification. And that's something where philosophy as well as art can have an effect. You can say, particularly in early life, this seems to be important, let me see what this is. So, you can, for example, respond to cues that say this particular piece of music says something important, and then listen to that piece of music and pick up what that piece of music is about. So yes, spiritual fuel can shape sense of life. But really it's primarily the other way around.
A nice answer, Alexander. Justin appreciated it too. He wrote back saying, I agree that sense of life and spiritual fuel are bilateral, and that he takes solace and inspiration in the quality of material provided by the Atlas Society.
Thank you for that spiritual fuel.
Yes, thank you, Justin. And you got a shout out from Mercedes Azurdia, who liked the fact that you mentioned Buffy in an Objectivist webinar. I liked it too. I'm a Buffy fan, so. And by the way, if anyone's interested in how Objectivist values square with the idea of someone who's sacrificing their life to save the world, as Buffy kind of is, I have an essay on our website called The Charms and Enchantments of Fantasy, where I talk about the interesting metaphysical predicaments that fantasy creates that makes egoism and self-sacrifice walk hand in hand. Just a little self-advertising.
That sounds quite interesting. I have not read that piece.
Charms and Enchantments of Fantasy on our website. Another question in from Charlie Brown. Thanks for coming back, Charlie. I think you've been here for the whole course, and that's been fantastic. It writes in saying, thanks for the conception of music, and then asks, what do architectural buildings as works of art represent in reality?
I am not certain that architectural, that architecture does constitute art, in as much as, at least primarily, it is a creation, not a recreation of reality. It is a creation of something new. Here is a building. The purpose of it is to be a building, to actually, keep you warm and dry and so forth, keep you and your possessions secure. That said, I think at least some of the time, architecture can serve very much the way that music does, to directly induce a certain emotional state. So, for example, churches commonly have one or both of these two functions: to give you the sense of being lifted up towards God, and or to give you the sense of being very low beneath God. So there's a sense of exaltation and abasement, and some combination of those is likely to be at play in a church. Much in the architecture of the church, much as in the music of the church. You look at a beautiful skyscraper, particularly a deco skyscraper, such as the Empire State Building or the Chrysler Building. These are buildings that are meant to showcase their own height and thereby the sense of human achievement that represents. That draw you up, but draw you up not towards something unattainable, but very much towards something attainable. You can go up the stairs or the elevator to the observation deck. You might actually do business with somebody who has an office up there, or you might have an office up there. And when so you look at them and they have that kind of a sense of exaltation to them. And I would say, in that regard, architecture can be parallel to music. but it's a little bit iffy.
I would just like to add to Alexander's answer that there's a standing debate in objectivist philosophy and objectivist aesthetics about the status of architecture. And also a thing that's worth noting about the nature of art is that in speaking of art as a recreation of reality in accordance with the artist's metaphysical value judgments, Rand is defining what we commonly call high art, talking about sculpture, music, dance, poetry, fiction, theater, and derivative arts like music, like movies, and highly immersive structured video games. And but that doesn't exhaust the realm of the aesthetic. There are elements of design, for instance, that don't exactly fulfill that function, but that also have aesthetic function. And architecture partakes of that aspect of aesthetics as well, and it has a highly utilitarian character that it has to fulfill too. And all those things come together to make architecture an interesting case. And like automotive design is another example, I suppose, where people care a lot about the aesthetics of automobiles, and yet there's a definite utilitarian function that has to be fulfilled by the automobile.
And actually there's a decorative art that I myself enjoy practicing and appreciating, page design, and associated arts like font design. There are various fonts that evoke, that carry with them certain characteristics, either because of their historical connotations or because simply of their shape. Some fonts, seem to have a certain solidity to them. Some fonts seem to have a certain sharp edge to them, and that can evoke certain emotional responses. I have certain fonts that I always go to when doing my own personal documents that are things I think about much the same way I think about the styles of tie that I choose. Although this tie, actually, I chose because I was talking about art. This is in fact a Gryffindor tie. For those who don't know the word Gryffindor, this is a tie from Harry Potter.
Thank you, Alexander. David Hurwitz writes to say, do you think that one can separate the appreciation of a musical composition from the composer? For example, Richard Wagner was a despicable person in David's opinion, yet his music moves David emotionally.
Yes, you can. First of all, let me simply point out that it is possible to listen to a piece of music and evaluate it without having the foggiest clue who wrote it. If you are, sitting listening to the radio and the DJ plays something, or you're listening to Pandora and Pandora comes up with something, and you don't look at the screen, or you don't hear the DJ's announcement, you're going to respond to that piece of music without knowing anything about the composer that he didn't put into that very piece of music. So there's one thing. Second, you're dealing with emotional abstractions. And at the level that the piece of music is written at, even a very bad idea may turn out to correspond to the same emotional abstraction as you might have for a very good idea. For example, if you are somebody who loves patriotic music, you might find yourself enjoying the patriotic music of regimes you really despise. Now, you might not. particularly to the extent that what makes those particular regimes despicable turns out to be reflected in their music. But to the extent that it's people writing music about the theme that, you know, we value our society and our country, and we're proud of it and so forth, it may resonate with you, and you may then go, oh no, I just enjoyed a Nazi song. And in fact, you may enjoy it even knowing that. So yeah, yes, you can enjoy. You can separate the evaluation from the composer, and certainly, if you can do that in the cases that I was just talking about where it's related, in many cases it won't be related at all. So, for example, if you know, it won't be very closely related. So, for example, somebody might be, you know, might have a very bad set of ideas and even a very bad sense of life in a certain respect, and much better ideas and much better sense of life in some other respect. And so you might enjoy the art that he creates in the respect in which he's a good person. But I mean, it doesn't even have to be that case, because where there is an overlap, where at the emotional level there is a similarity between what the composition is celebrating and what the you know, and what you value, you can see value in that. So, for example, one of my all-time favorite pieces of music is the Easter music from Cavalleria Rusticana by Pietro Mascagni. Now, from what I gather, his politics were unsavory, to say the least. It's a piece of Christian religious music, but it's a celebration of life. The theme is that Christ is not dead. And what the music is really about is about the restoration of life. In fact, there's an alternate set of lyrics in English for it called Anthem for Spring, which also, you know, is couched in religious language, but is all about the world being reborn. And you know, it's a beautiful piece of music. And okay, it was originally written in a Christian context by a person of dubious politics. But the piece of music is still an excellent piece of music, and one that resonates with me quite a bit.
Thanks, Alexander. And we have another. Well, before we move on to a question, Kate Jones, who's been attending these webinars, asked if she could contribute a haiku on the subject of art. And her haiku goes like this. What is art, you ask, in all its forms and splendor, mind made visible?
Okay.
Thank you, Kate. And on that note, some people write in and say they like the haiku, so there you go. Props to you, Kate. Well, Alexander, I think that brings us to the end of the questions.
All right, so if that's all we've got for questions, I want to thank you for coming to my webinar series, especially those of you who come to all 5. I seriously want to encourage any feedback. Please bear in mind that I am going to be giving a revised version of these lectures at the summer seminar, that is to say the Atlas Summit, for our student audience. And I therefore want to be able to improve on this as much as I can and make a much better version next time. And therefore, if you have any feedback, constructive criticism, what have you, please share it with me. Again, thank you very much for coming.